Alrighty, so this is my presentation for the final project, and the topic I picked was Nintendo versus PlayStation. So it's very interesting for the brand competitor analysis. I grew up with both systems, funny enough, different periods of my life. So I'm hoping that I can give it a little bit of knowledge, and it was interesting to have this research done. So without further ado, let's begin. So. Funny enough, the video game industry is that a lot of people don't really know this, but Nintendo and PlayStation, well, back then it was known as Sony, they actually were business partners. Both companies originated from Japan and they both were in the entertainment industry at the time. Nintendo was already, I believe, a decade in the video game industry with the NES and SNES. And in the early 90s, they actually were collaborating with Sony in order to have a joint console, which pretty much was supposed to include a CD, which was revolutionary at the time. However, this is definitely why brands should be careful when it comes to stepping out. But Nintendo ended up just saying, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. And they ended up just getting away with the idea and they backed out from the deal with Sony. However, because what had happened was that Nintendo decided that they chose Philips, which was a different company at the time, and they released their own console with the Virtual Console, which didn't even do that well. Sony was definitely insulted on how Nintendo acted, and with that being said, they decided to launch their own console, which was the PlayStation. Well, which will later be known as the PS1, but back then it was the PlayStation, and it was a commercial success. It was definitely a big contribution to the video game industry, and it shook a lot of heads, including Nintendo's. And it's definitely interesting to think about what would have happened if Nintendo and PlayStation actually, collaborated. Who knows? Maybe they would have been able to beat Microsoft. So the client company that I decided to represent is Nintendo. Nintendo is very old. It was founded in 1889 in Japan, and it started off as a Japanese playing cards company. Over the decades, it would always be known as entertainment. So just keep that in mind that Nintendo always had entertainment in their brain. They evolved from having card games to toys for kids. Then they were in arcade games, and then eventually they created video games. Currently, they have the Switch. It should be the Switch 2, I know, but pretty much the Switch and Switch 2, they're hybrid consoles where you can pretty much play on the TV as well as on the go, no matter where you're at. And Nintendo has a strong positive relationship with their consumers due to their, well-recognized IPs. A lot of people know who Mario is, a lot of people know who Zelda is, and it's been coming out in Universal Studios with their rides as well as them having movies. I know that they're gonna have Super Mario Galaxy movie come out next year, so Nintendo is definitely like well known. A lot of people know who they are. A lot of fans do think that sometimes Nintendo could be a lot, in a way, controlling when it comes to just having their content being released. Nintendo's very particular of how they want to be represented with just different members of the community, and a lot of people have seen how Nintendo have struck down and had pretty much given themselves a bad rep for being very, in a way, just closed-minded when it comes to just new projects as well as being able to share their work. I'm sorry, I'm just making sure that my screen is being recorded. All right, so the competitor brand, Sony, I'm gonna just from here on out refer to them as PlayStation since pretty much that's what they're known for. Sony itself was actually founded as well in Japan, in Tokyo, in 1946. They were originally just doing their thing in the entertainment industry. They were also into electronics as well, which is why in the early 90s they were trying to not compete, I'm sorry, work with Nintendo and pretty much just give themselves, an advantage in a way to get their step in the video game industry. We already know what happened there, and with that being said, PlayStation just said, okay, we're gonna release our own consoles, and that's what ended up happening. So, PlayStation has been coming out since the 90s, and it's been with the new, really, well, not really new, but with the further new, like I guess you could say, the relatively new PS5, which is one of the top selling consoles of, this generation or in video game history. Sony also has like the record, I believe, for the PS2, which was known as the one of the highest like selling consoles of all time. So they definitely knew what they were doing. So analytics. So with that being said, I just wanted to list, I guess, the competition you could say, regarding just how Nintendo would have their game, well, not games, I'm sorry, their consoles with the PlayStation. PlayStation is very easy since they just have numbers. And these are the terms that I searched when I was doing my research and the analytics, and I just wanted to see what was going to come up. So I searched the current systems just to see, because I feel like people would probably be talking about the Nintendo Switch, unlike the Nintendo 64 or the PS2. So that's pretty much where my head was at. So these are the graphs that I got. So the first I wanted to include was sentiment. So it's very interesting because I'm not sure if it's easy to see because I know that it is in presentation mode, but with PlayStation, they actually don't have a good reception right now. By the way, all the graphs are going to be about a month. So this past month, they all had about a 60% review when it came to just having a negative reception. And it looked like it peaked. I remember it was in December with PlayStation. Now, I tried to do my research and I was trying to see what was going on in December, but I guess they weren't happy with it. Nintendo is a little bit more on the even side. However, they do have a little bit more of a negative reception since it is 52 compared to 58. I'm sorry, not 58, 48%. And their charts seem to be like going in and out. It isn't as high as PlayStation, but it's something to note that both companies they still have more negative than positive. Although Nintendo has more of a positive with 48 to 52, with PlayStation having 40 to 60. So it's a big difference when it comes to just the different margins. Okay, now regarding emotions, I just want to know, interestingly enough, the highest emotion from each graph. So PlayStation has a lot more anger being represented, with just a little under of a quarter this past month, with Nintendo having actually not anger as their biggest emotion, but disappointment and well, sadness, but I definitely would say that it's disappointment since it's 1/5. And with that being said, I think it's because Nintendo has recently done things which I would get into regarding how, they definitely have always been very old-fashioned when it came to their online services, as well as just having an overall structure when it came to just pretty much being able to work with people and work with their fans. And a lot of people, I think, including myself, have been disappointed by Nintendo, even though they're a good game. Like, they have a lot of good games that a lot of people have grown up on. It's very hard sometimes to be a fan of them because of their business antics. Demographics, another thing that I wanted to note is that Nintendo actually has a more diverse audience when it comes to gender. So there is a 29% female audience compared to PlayStation only having 19%. I think the reason why for that is because Nintendo is more family orientated, so it's not as competitive compared to PlayStation, and they definitely view themselves as like very kid friendly, like anybody could pick up the game. And of course, it is easier, I guess, for just a whole family to play, like a mom or something, or a sister playing video games compared to, PlayStation. But don't get me wrong, I have literally had cousins who literally just play Call of Duty and they're fine. But Nintendo is relatively easy to pick up, I'm not gonna lie, because it's more simple. So word cloud. What I want to note here is interestingly enough, I like how both of them have their competitors in different clouds. So let me see here. Nintendo is under the PlayStation when I searched up PlayStation, as well as I think the PlayStation, yep, PS5 is under, as well as PlayStation under Nintendo. So it's very interesting to see that, you know, besides obviously the biggest ones, which is PS5 and then Metro Prime Form and then Chance to Win, which of course could be likely due to the holiday season since Black Friday is also in there. It's very interesting to see that, the competitors are there as well because maybe people aren't comparing them. All right, so I just wanted to list down the results that I have. So the areas where I believe Nintendo is weaker is how 20%. Like I said, 1/5 is sad when it comes to just, you know, with Nintendo as a company. And I think that with that being said, there is definitely a need for improvement. I would say areas where PlayStation is strong, although it isn't reflected, I think it's widely known that PlayStation definitely has higher powered software. They've always had higher powered software with Nintendo pretty much since they started. And with that being said, that means like graphics are looking more better, games are looking nicer, and I would say load time is definitely easier, and it's just like it's not as like limited when you're playing a Nintendo game. And I think that they have a strong competitive gaming and online ecosystem because their online is much better than Nintendo's, since Nintendo's online is definitely more primitive. And, I would say in comparison with Nintendo is that they're more family oriented. So with that being said, I feel like Nintendo expects people to play just together in a room compared to just being online. So it's like it's something that they still need to work on though. And then I just listed the analytics from what I just reported. All right, so that's pretty much the end of it. With that being said, I would say that Nintendo still at least are holding their own with PlayStation, but I do think that they definitely need to change their methods as well as just making sure that everything works well when it comes to online as well as, their prices because I feel like we don't want it to increase when it comes to, the disappointment as well as just the negative reception since it is 48% negative reception this past month only. So it's something that, it's not as bad, but if something isn't addressed, it'll definitely increase and we don't know what would happen from there. So yeah, that's pretty much the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you guys have a good, happy holidays and take care.